Hey everyone, welcome to Decaf. I am your fill-in host, Mark Cunningham, and Taylor is, I think, in Orlando right now. So I am hosting, and we have a special guest, better than last week, certainly better than when. We have our CEO, Justin Owen. So Justin, we are happy you're here with us today. He has been lobbying for this, maybe harder than you've lobbied for any policy before, to be on the show. So we finally have accepted that.
I do this for a living, and I'm terrible at this one because I never get to be on the show.
Well, we heard your pleas. You did a good job convincing us, so we are excited to have you on. So we're going to start with probably certainly one of the biggest sports stories of the year, and something there's been a lot of disagreement from all sides of the country, all conferences, all teams. The college football playoffs were announced. The top two were not surprising. You had Michigan number 1, Washington number 2. And then it got a little interesting where they put Texas number 3 and they put a one-loss Texas and one-loss Alabama team in over an undefeated ACC champ, Florida State. The reasoning from the committee was that Florida State's quarterback was hurt. So even though they had an undefeated team and they were the first ever Power 5 conference team to be left out that was undefeated, that they felt like Alabama basically had a better chance in the playoff. And Texas as well. I think that, you're hearing a lot about the Alabama controversy, but it really is both those teams. So I actually have no idea how you feel about this. You are a fair guy. You're an SEC guy, but you're not like, oh, I love this conference no matter what. I mean, you just happen to like Tennessee and you're kind of in the middle on that. So I actually don't know this. What is your opinion on what the committee did? Was it fair? Was it not fair? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
What's the joke? I love Satan because he's in the Bible. That's kind of how people feel about Alabama and the SEC. Well, we're going to root for the SEC, so we'll root for Bama too, even though they're the devil. So I agree with the outrage over this, especially with the rules have always been, or at least the practice has always been, you win a Power 5 conference, and certainly if you're undefeated, you're going to be in the playoff. And so to say that Florida State shouldn't be in because their quarterback happened to get hurt and because they're now playing their third string quarterback really tells me this is more about ratings than it is about rewarding the teams for their performance throughout the season. Now, I know that early losses are often looked at more favorably than late losses. So that's going to hurt Georgia as more than it's going to hurt Alabama in this situation. But at the end of the day, I actually think Texas should be in. I don't think that Bama should be in, and I think it should be Florida State.
So let me ask you this question, because I think that I'm willing to acknowledge my bias against the SEC.
Yes,
that is
you're
something
very
I have.
anti-SEC.
Yes. But I'm anti-SEC because of the media, and I think that a lot of people who were not on my side before might kind of understand. But my question
Certainly
is, if Texas hadn't beaten Alabama, do you think – so imagine that Alabama lost to some other teams. They lost to Ole Miss or something like that. Do you think Florida State's in ahead of Texas? Because my opinion is they only had to put Texas in because they would look so ridiculous putting them in – putting Alabama in over a team that beat them by 10 on the road. Do you think that's the reason Florida State's ultimately out, because Texas beat Alabama?
Well, I think if Alabama doesn't lose to Texas or at all, they're certainly in after beating Georgia. If Georgia had won – then they should obviously still be in. I mean, Georgia went from being the first ranked, number 1 team in the nation the whole season to losing by 3 points, and they're out. So, some would say that Georgia even has a solid argument for being screwed on this. But yeah, I do think that had it been differently, the look would be different. And I agree that putting Texas in was a necessity in order to get Bama in. And that's just the influence that Saban has and that Alabama has. And again, it is true that Bama versus Michigan is going to get higher ratings than Michigan versus Florida State. I'll give him that. However, that's not the point of the playoffs. It's to reward the teams that have worked the hardest. And it's certainly not, when you lose your quarterback, you shouldn't be punished for that, especially if you continue to win. Yeah, they didn't play so great against Louisville, but they still won the game and they won the conference championship and they're still undefeated despite now playing with their third string quarterback. So I do think that it's very unfortunate. Thank goodness we're going to have a 12-team playoff next year because, there'll still be complaints about who's 13th and who's 14th and who still got left out. We still see that in, the March Madness debate. And so that will still happen. But it'll be a lot more competitive and it'll be a lot easier to determine who really is the best team because they're going to play for it in a bracket tournament.
Yeah, it's a lot hard to argue. You have 2 or 3 losses. Like, well, you've lost a lot of games. You like whether you're 12 or 13, you put that on yourself.
Right.
The thing that bothered me the most was that if Florida State is clearly inferior to Alabama, which was the argument, why are they not inferior to Georgia, to Ohio State? They should be like 8th. If that's how they really feel, all those teams, Georgia, Ohio, they're all better. They all have, not better, but they have a full team, and that they were ranked higher than them before they lost. It felt inconsistent, and it felt like an I know. Talking about the SEC, I think it's actually more about Alabama and Georgia than the SEC at large. I think the other teams like Tennessee, Ole Miss, A&M, they're ranked higher because they really want Georgia and Alabama to be there, and it makes their strength of schedule look better if you put Ole Miss at number 9. Or Tennessee at number 21, things like that. But it is an interesting discussion, and I don't think people. I think we're getting really angry about this. People are not bad people because on the other side of this, I feel like this is a bigger argument than abortion. You see people like, oh, if you're for Florida State, you're a terrorist. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there from both sides.
But you can't blame Bama fans for being happy that they got in, right? It's not their fault. It's the committee's decision. It's not theirs, right? So.
And it's not even Alabama's fault. They didn't do anything wrong. Nick Saban did anything wrong. He coached his team. He lost one game. Even if you think they're overrated or they shouldn't be there, it's not his fault. It's fully 100%. On the committee. The same way corporate welfare, we don't blame the companies, right? We blame the government for giving them money. So Bama's the corporate welfare of the college football playoff. I don't think Taylor's going to like that one. But what's really interesting is it's not just a football thing now. We're going to move on kind of to it's somehow become this political football. And I want to hear about what you think. So Ron DeSantis basically said in next year's budget, he's suggesting they put $1 million aside to sue the NCAA. We've seen a congressman from Florida say that they want an investigation by the government because Florida State should have been in the playoff. I think I know how you feel about this, but I mean, I'm going to leave it out there. Do you think this is the appropriate role of government? Do you think that they should be getting so involved in what football team is in the college football playoffs? I mean, tell me your thoughts on kind of what Ron DeSantis and other Florida members of Congress on both sides have suggested.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. And every year, members of Congress will get up and complain about something as it relates to sports. They got all involved in the golf debate over PGA. And so it's not surprising. It's really disappointing, though, that Republicans that are claimed to be small government now use the government to get at whatever culture war outrage. Outrage society used to be a leftist thing. And now the right gets so outraged and wants to use the government, big government, to its own advantage, to get to its own ends, when that's just not the role of government. It's not Ron DeSantis' job as governor or as a presidential candidate to stop what happened. You can disagree with it. Look, I'm not going to defend the NCAA by any means. And we've sat here and trashed them over the decision that has been made. What's going to destroy the NCAA is their conference realignment. That's essentially going to make them irrelevant eventually over time, which is a good thing. I think that is going to create healthier competition and a more robust collegiate sports atmosphere than we've seen because of the NCAA. So no lost love there, but it's not the role of government to make that happen or to sue the NCAA or to, break them up or whatever it is. And so we as conservatives, right of center people, we need to get back to the basics when it comes to the role of government and realize if we're going to use government to advance our own ends, one of these days when we're not in charge, it's going to be used against us too.
I just don't understand how you can say you're a fiscal conservative and say we're going to put $1 million. I mean, like it might not sound like that much, but that is tax money that you're saying to try to sue the NCAA. I mean, it's really hard to justify that from a limited government perspective. And again, it's at least the Democrats don't pretend to be limited government, right? It's like these people who talk about it. Ron DeSantis keeps talking about that. And, in a lot of ways, he is limited government. But you just wonder if this is do you think it's a PR stunt, or do you think he really feels like he has a case?
Yeah, it's purely a PR stunt, and he's done this over and over and over. This has become his mantra, is to go after these companies and these private entities because he doesn't like what they're doing and because it's popular. It's a populist thing to do. That said, if I'm a Florida Gator jorts wearing fan, I'm going to be upset about how they're spending my money.
Well, if you couldn't tell, that was obviously a dig at Florida fans. In case you we don't actually consider jorts a good thing at Beacon, so that is. I know some people are good with that. And I think that what's funny is I have a couple of friends who are Florida State fans. I really feel for them and I feel for their team and everything. But I also remember when they were making fun of UCF for claiming the national championship like 7 years ago. And I'm like, now don't forget, they actually had a better start of the schedule than you did 6 years ago when they were that. So I do think, and my dad keeps saying he was really upset about this. He's like, well, Florida State in '93 got in the national championship when they shouldn't have. They lost head to head to Notre Dame and they made it and Notre Dame didn't, despite the same record.
For the record, the last national championship that Tennessee won was against Florida State as well.
Yeah, I hate that I'm defending Florida State because I don't care for them, but this is a very clear injustice. And like you said, hopefully with next year with 12 teams, we'll be good. But I wonder, if the governor of Wyoming is going to sue because they're 15th and that's, they're not in there. But it is a problem. So I want to move on to something that I think is a bigger deal, maybe outside of the parents who will benefit. It might be a bigger deal for you than anybody else in the state. Recently, Governor Lee announced that in next year's agenda that he is going to put universal education savings accounts in his agenda for the legislative session. So, I'm going to have you explain what education savings accounts are. I know most people know, but just so they kind of understand the difference between that and vouchers. But you have been on the front lines of educational choice in Tennessee for what? 11 years, 12 years at this point?
We filed our first voucher bill in 2011. So yeah, this will I think be the 14th legislative session working on this issue. So it's been a long, hard road. And then it has, to your point, kind of explaining what ESAs are. It's evolved from this voucher concept of, let parents choose a private school with the dollars that we already spend on their child's education. Now it's become more versatile than that through education savings accounts, similar to health savings accounts that a lot of people have. You get money in an account and you can use it for private school tuition, tutoring, therapy, all of those things. And what you don't use gets to roll over into a 529 for your kid's college fund. So it's really like this long game approach to getting parents more engaged in their kids' education, which we hear constantly that parents want more, certainly after COVID and what our public school systems did to kids during COVID has led to this huge, engagement among parents to have more access to options. And 9 states now give families these options. And so it's been a long time coming. We've got an ESA program, but it's limited to just a few areas of the state. And kids in suburban and rural areas of the state need just as many options as those that already have it. And so to see Governor Lee stand up, last week with both, the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House, a bunch of other legislative leaders, a packed room, parents, and others who have worked really hard to bring this to fruition. It was a really nice day to see that finally happen. It's been a long time coming, and the work just begins now. It's going to still be a heavy lift for Beacon Impact to the legislative session, but I'm optimistic and I'm just very excited that now that we've set the tone for what we can do for parents and for kids across the state. Now it's just time to deliver.
And I would also make a note for media: stop calling them vouchers. That it is ESAs it's different than vouchers, and when they use that, it makes them feel uneducated about the issue. I mean, ESAs are a completely different concept than vouchers are.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason is because the term vouchers has been demonized so much by opponents of school choice that it's exciting for them to use it and try to kind of undermine it. Of course, those that oppose quote unquote vouchers in education support them in housing, support them in food, for food stamps and EBT cards and all of that stuff, and say, yeah, we should be giving people a portion of funding and let them choose what to do with it. The concept is, we're already spending this money on your education. You get to decide what to do with it. You don't just have to go to the government school, just like you don't have to go to the government grocery store or live in government housing. We empower people with options and choice. The left likes that in other areas, but they don't seem to like it in education.
Well, in Chicago, there might just be government grocery stores the way that the mayor's acting right now.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, kind of going back to like you have honestly worked on this for so long. You've made all these you've made all these all this progress when you did the ESAs for special needs children, and then you were able to do it for these areas that are Memphis, Chattanooga, Nashville that need them. What would you say? We've done polling on this, and I mean, basically, we said this. I said this to Taylor that basically you're more likely to believe that the moon landing was fake than you are to be against, against ESAs. I mean, it is such a popular concept. Democrats, Republicans, independents, all, all geographic areas of the state believe in this in some sense, all demographic areas, race, gender, everyone believes in this. What would you say if, the people who are on the fence that, they say, you might say, oh, I was part of a union, or, my union heads tell me this is not a good idea. What would you say to these people who maybe don't quite understand the program, what it is, of why it's such a good idea for Tennessee families?
Yeah, it's simple at this rate. It's both the right thing to do and it's politically popular to do it. And those things aren't always aligned, right? We work hard all the time to convince politicians to do the right thing, even if it might cost them politically. We've even, with corporate welfare and particularly stadium subsidies, the public is pretty split on it. So we really can't say, well, this is really politically popular to be in this position. We have to admit that public's kind of split, but it's the right thing to do. So you should do it for philosophical reasons and that kind of thing. We can make that case with school choice, that parents, not the bureaucratic system, it's certainly not zip codes, just some random imaginary line, shouldn't get to dictate whether your kid gets into a good school or a bad school. You, the parent, should get to dictate that. It's a pretty easy sell from a philosophical standpoint. And the data just overwhelmingly supports the fact that choice improves outcomes both for the kids that utilize it and the kids that remain in public schools. So it's a win-win for everybody. We can make that case now, more so than ever before, especially after COVID. We can make the political case that if you vote against this, you're more likely to lose as a candidate than you are if you vote for it. And never before has it been more politically popular. Like you said, with our polling, it's a 70% almost across the state support it. And every demographic, whether you break that down among Republican, Democrat, Independent, male, female, parent, non-parent, overwhelmingly parent people support it. And so it's a win-win for the politicians. You get to do the right thing and you get to be rewarded politically for doing so.
And I would argue that if you're seeing this too, I would think about the messenger, because I think a lot of the people who are against this are people that personally benefit from the status quo system we have now. I mean, that does matter. School superintendents, they don't want options. They don't want, they say, oh, I'm doing a good job. So I do think that, incentives matter with that.
It matters a lot. And in some of these rural districts that, the school superintendent oversees the largest employer. They're the largest employer in that district. But just do the math if you're a politician. There are a lot more parents in your district than there are school superintendents. There are even a lot more parents than there are teacher union members who are going to be vocally opposed to this. So just do the math. Side with parents and not the system.
And if they're happy with the status quo, then we have a real issue, because I think that no matter where you're at, you can't be happy with how things are going now in education.
They've literally had generations to fix it and they haven't. So let's try something else.
Amen. Well, that's great. And I mean, obviously, I've been here for almost 10 years, but I mean, you've been working this 5 years before I even came. So, I mean, we obviously appreciate all your work, and we look forward to seeing what happens this session. So we're going to finish with a story that you actually sent me, which was the more I read about it, the more interesting it was. So the number one song in the country right now, and this is the number one song just generally, it's not the number one Christmas song, number one Billboard song, is Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree by Brenda Lee. This song was written in 1958, which also super weird. I was like, it's crazy she's still alive. She sang it when she was 13 years old.
13, and she sounds amazing. Like, what 13-year-old sounds like that? It's crazy.
I think she was 40. She sounds like a woman, like a full-grown like a person. I can't believe she was 13. And I also told you before that it was also hilariously written by a Jewish man who does not celebrate Christmas. He's like, it's a great song. I wanted to write it. But this song, which, I mean, it's always one of the top Christmas songs. We always listen to this. It has dethroned Mariah Carey, who's the only person who seems to be able to get number one at this time of the year. And it is number one for the first time in, I mean, I'm trying to do the math on this, like 60-something years, 65 years?
I think 65, yeah.
65 years, and that is it's crazy. I mean, and it's because of, and you kind of told me this, but it's a lot of, the reason that was because of this PR campaign that basically came out of Nashville. So, I mean, I want you to kind of explain what happened, and are you happy with this? Because a lot of people love Mariah Carey. That is the that is the number one Christmas song. Everyone's like, if I'm playing one song, it's Mariah Carey. But this is, so tell me about what actually happened in Nashville, because I mean, we're part of what made that happen, and then kind of your thoughts on it.
Well, so so many people are tired of hearing from from Mariah Carey. I think he has the whole thaw out thing. Like here it comes. Even starts in Thanksgiving. Like oh, we're about to start having to hear that ad nauseum all the time. And my wife is one of them. We've got to listen to it in rotation every time we listen to Christmas music. So it's exhausting. And every year it hits number one. And so there was some discussion about like, this is a great song. It's been so long since it came out. There's this cool story behind it. And so let's start pushing it out there and just tell people, hey, don't forget about this song. And it really did emanate from like Music Row in Nashville as really an organic thing. It wasn't really like a paid political stunt. It was just an organic thing that spread around. And I think it's hit like 35 million streams since Thanksgiving, which is amazing because it's also a much better song than Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas, right? I mean, it's just a cool song that she sang it when she was 13, recorded it when she was 13. Like you said, she sounds much, much older. And she still can sing, like she's still got talent. And so it's just a really cool story to highlight and a much better song. It always takes me back to my favorite Christmas movie, Home Alone. So I always like to hear it because it's a good kind of bit of nostalgia for me too.
I feel like they could have done kind of a political mail or kind of like stop Mariah Carey. We can't afford to have her number one on the charts anymore.
Negative advertising in politics works better than positive advertising for your candidate. So we might have had like 60 million streams of this song if you had gone negative.
That's right. And All I Want for Christmas is You. And if you're the 30% that love it, the other 70% of people hate it. So if you really would have gone on that, I think it would have worked. But before we go, I'm gonna ask, what is your favorite Christmas song? I mean, I know that you're probably not as into Christmas music as I am, but what is your favorite Christmas song if you had to pick one?
I do love Christmas music, and
Okay.
that's a hard one for me. Like this is a really great one. I don't know. I have a hard time with that question because I like Christmas music so much, and I just like the variety of it and kind of the rotation. Some of it's a little more religious, right, and spiritual. Some of it's more, rocking around the Christmas tree type. So this is definitely one of my favorites, but I would really have a hard time picking just one. What's yours?
Well, so I never heard of this band, but it's a Christian band. They're called like Third Day. Do you know who they are?
Mm-mm.
They do all these. I never heard of them. I don't really listen, but like they do all these great renditions of Christmas songs. They have like the guitar and the drums and stuff like that. And it's kind of like, but I like all their stuff. But I like the Blake Shelton, Gwen Stefani. You Make It Feel Like Christmas Time.
That's
It's kind of
one.
it's one of the newer ones. But I mean, I think all Christmas music's good, but I can hear that the issue is that every third song is Mariah Carey. And like you said, you want to hear a variety, no matter, even if it was good. I liked it at some point. It was a good song, but I can't keep listening to it.
Well, it's one of those things that you just can't like it anymore. You hear it so much. Like it is just, it's ruined it for everybody. So I'm glad they have some more variety.
Absolutely. So congratulations to Brenda Lee. We're excited that you're number one. We're excited that, Nashville is able to contribute to that. And I feel like this should be the new Christmas tradition, is just trying to knock down Mariah Carey every Christmas, because it's all she has. She doesn't do songs anymore. It's just this song every year. So I feel like we really need to like put her down a peg.
And she makes something, I can't remember, somebody told me how much it was. Several $1 million a year just off streams from this song. So kudos to her, but it's time to be dethroned. It's time for a new queen, and that's Brenda Lee.
I got to figure out a way to make a trashy Christmas song. I don't have to work anymore. Just a couple $1 million every Christmas and call it a day.
Not a bad gig.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that is all we have. You can listen to Decaf on Spotify, anywhere that you get your podcast. We appreciate your time, and thanks to Justin for joining us. We will see you all next week.